Well, hello there. Welcome to Daily Politics on Trust TV. On this program, we discuss and unpack issues around politics, policy and governance. I'm Abdullahi Ahmed, standing in for Idris Hamza. Now, during Tuesday's plenary, the Senate President Godswill Akpabio announced the formation of a selection committee responsible for the determining of composition of Senate standing committees, which amount to around 70 committees in total. Now, the panel consists of the 2 presiding officers and all 8 principal officers of the Red Chamber. Akpabio will serve as the committee chairperson, while Deputy Senate President Jibril Barau will act as the deputy chairperson. Now, additional members of the committee include Opeyemi Bamidele of APC from Ekiti State as the majority leader of the Senate. David Umahi as the deputy majority leader of the Senate will also feature in the committee. Muhammad Ali Ndume from Borno APC South as Senate Majority Whip will also be featured in the committee, alongside Lola Ashiru from Kwara as Deputy Majority Whip. Now, in addition, the Senate President named the chairpersons and deputy chairpersons for several standing committees as follows. Rules and Business will be chaired by Titus Zam, and Opeyemi Bamidele will deputize for the committee. For Senate Services, Senator Sunday Karimi will chair the committee, while Senator Williams Eteng Jonah will deputize. The Ethics and Public Petitions Committee will be chaired by Okechukwu Ezia, and Khalid Ibrahim Mustafa will deputize for the committee. Public Accounts will be chaired by Aliu Wadada Ahmed, and Peter Onyeka will deputize for the committee. The National Security and Intelligence Committee will be chaired by Senator Shehu Buba Umar, while Senator Ekpenyong will deputize for the committee. The Legislative Compliance Committee will be chaired by Senator Garba Musa Maidoki, and Senator Ede Defino will deputize for the committee. The Media Committee will be chaired by Senator Adeyemi Adaramodu as chairman, and Salisu Shuaibu Afolabi will deputize for the committee. The Appropriations Committee will be chaired by Senator Olamilekon Adeola, and Senator Ali Dume will deputize for the committee. Senator Akpabio mentioned that the Appropriations Committee was promptly established in anticipation of any supplementary budget. Now, tonight's program, ladies and gentlemen, will focus on the equity aspect of this conversation. Many organizations have on different occasions called on the President and the leaders of the National Assembly to implement the 35% affirmative action. However, the question on whether there is enough women in the National Assembly, or whether the women in the National Assembly are up to 35% to the total number of legislators, draws the conversation in a different direction. And to discuss this tonight, we are joined by, well, let's say experts on this conversation. Buki Shonibare is the Executive Director at Invictus Africa, and she will be joined to further unpack the conversation by Bukola Ido, who is the team lead at Kimpact Development Initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening to both of you, and thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Right. All right, we'll take a quick break. When we do come back, we'll set the ball in motion. Daily Politics starts after the break. The conversation is about women representation in government and whether or not it has been enough over the years. I guess the obvious answer is not enough, especially given Nigeria's track record so far. So let's begin the conversation, Buki, by understanding why we are where we are today. Nigeria has one of the lowest rankings as far as female representation in government is concerned, which is quite surprising. We are the largest democracy on the continent, the largest black democracy in the world. What do you think is at the heart of this conversation?
I think at the heart of this conversation is that we live in a society where women are not considered to be appropriate for leadership. And that underlying factor or norm sort of like informs every other effect that we are seeing today in terms of women representation in leadership positions generally, not just in political leadership. We live in a deeply entrenched patriarchal society that advances the leadership of men and considers women to be, you know, housewives. They should be at home, and even if they are going to do anything, they should work, you know, in the kitchen. And there are conversations revolves around the fact that even the whole aspect of working in the home and taking care of the child is actually job enough for a woman. And so when we look at, you know, the leadership sphere that we expect women to function, we don't have it. But let's look at what data is saying in this regard. The highest we've ever had in terms of women representation in the Senate was in 2007 when we had 8.3%. That means we had 7 out of 109 Senate members as women. Right. That's the highest we've ever had. What has now happened is we now have 2.8% women representation in the Senate. That means we have just 3 out of 109. The last time we had any figure like that was in 1999. At the House of Representatives, the highest we had was in 2011 when we had 7.3%. Then we had 26 women out of 360. But now we have you know, 17 women out of 360. And then we must not also forget the State Houses of Assembly, where we currently have a 5.7%. That's 57 out of 993 members. What this is showing is a dwindling trend. And I often would ask myself, is this a wicked problem? Wicked problems are those problems that are too complex to be solved. And sometimes it looks as if they don't have solutions. So at the heart of it, every other problem in law will say that there is a decision by a foremost judge in a case called McFoy and UAC. In that decision, the judge said something quite profound. He said that we can't place something on nothing and expect it to stand. We can't expect increased women representation on the nothingness of the patriarchal society that we live in and expect it to function. It's not possible.
Is it fair to say that your analysis, although to the point, is also ignoring the fact that we've made certain gains over the years, and that this might be symptomatic of a problem, but it's not an altogether bad situation?
We've made certain gains, but the data is not showing that gains. The only point in our, for instance, the legislative arm, where we've had increase, was to move from 15 women out of 360 at the House of Representatives to 17. Now we have 17. And that tells you that that's the only place we moved. And the Senate, we went down. So yes, we've made certain gains, but what data is showing is that that gains is not showing in terms of the number and the percentage of women represented, for instance, in the Senate. For instance, we've never had a female president. We've never had a female vice president, not even a female Senate president or female deputy. The best that we had was Patricia Ete, and she didn't spend more up to 6 months in that position as a Speaker of the House of Representatives. So yes, we've made gains, but what is data saying? And one last point before I move on from this question. March 1st, 2022, the House of Reps and the Senate threw out 5 gender bills. Those are basic bills. We can talk about it around citizenship, indigenship. You know, those are basic things that you expect that for a country that can boast of advancing in terms of women acceptance, those bills should not be something that we should even be debating, much less throwing out.
So let's get your take on this one. What are your thoughts about the peculiarity of the situation from the Nigerian point of view?
Well, I think I would like to start again from that aspect of whether we have made gains or not. Of course, Bukky agree we make certain gain, but I will also say we've not made any gain at all. And if you ask me, at all, we've not, because if you, according to what she said, if you look at what the data is saying, because data is just the yardstick you can use. Whatever you are saying, let's look at the data. Now, if we in the Ninth Assembly, if we have 15 women in at the House of Representatives, now we have 17. But now go back to the Senate. You had 7. Now you have 3. So if you do the balancing, one outweigh the other. So that then, but again, don't look at it like that.
As far as the data is concerned, that it is one-dimensional if we're just looking at the numbers, because you look at certain situations, there are factors around why that may be. For instance, you take the point, you take the case in point from Adamawa, for instance, where Senator Binani left, you know, her senatorial seat to contest for the governorship seat, and you didn't have any other woman step in to contest. for the Senate position. So that would explain why that seat is now filled by a man, instead of saying, okay, the woman went for election and failed. Aren't those factors necessary to understand this?
And that you are looking at Adamawa, but at the same time, how many number of women contested for that for senatorial seat? Over 30. How many won their seat? 3. So it's go beyond that. And even if you have to look at it, let's even leave the elective position, even in the appointive position. So you have, for instance, now let's first of all talk about Osun. Let me use Osun in the Southwest as an example. In the last dispensation, they had 2 women in the State House of Assembly. Now they had none. So the all 26-member House of Assembly are all men. Now the governor just sent the list of the commissioners to the House of Assembly. Out of like about 25, you only have 2 women. So, and in the last election, I mean the last dispensation, you have up to 5 women. So what
in the State Executive Council? In
the State Executive Council. Now, so that is to tell you that both in elective and appointive, we will not be frank with ourselves if we are saying we have made certain gains. But if you look at what the data is saying critically, we know that we need to do more. However, that is even at that particular, if you come to the political party, aside women leader, how many do you have? Even let's come down to the ward ESCO. How many women do you have? Let's come to the, now, most of the political parties run what we call the delegate system. Now, how many of the women are delegates? No, because we cannot say we are making gain, but we need to see how it translates. Even in the outside politics, even within the economic, the economic sphere, corporate environment, you still have women struggling. So for me, I think we need to do better. Now, and I think one of the things we also have to look at is this. In the Ninth Assembly, how many gender bills do we have? How many of them were thrown out? How many of them that we have that did not see the light of the day? These are a lot of yardsticks. Now, at the end of the day, you also now come to the continental or the regional, which is the, let's take Africa. We are doing badly because I mean, what the statistics is saying now, it shows that we are not really doing well. I mean, I think what we need to do is to have a frank conversation on how we need to move forward. Okay,
Bukky, we'll circle back to the data because we have a lot of it that can actually show that we're not making as much progress as we need to as far as the African continent is concerned. Last year's data suggests that we are 54th on the continent as far as women representation in government is concerned, which is something that is definitely baffling. Well, Bukky, your thoughts on the highs and lows as far as politics is concerned? One election cycle, you have more females. The next election cycle, that number could be wiped out, just as already been established. And the most fascinating thing is we did well as far back as 1999, which you pointed out, 157 in the National Assembly. Now you're talking about, you know, less than half of that. In the National Assembly, just 3 female senators for the 10th Assembly. What is responsible for this lack of consistency and lack of consolidation from election cycle to election cycle? What do you think is happening here?
I think that we must come to terms with the fact that we have a male-dominated political system in Nigeria. Male-dominated political system in the sense that the men in the political parties are then the gatekeepers. You know, in Yoruba we say they are the afobajes. The afobajes are the ones that make kings. Basically saying that they are the ones who decide who gets in or not. It's a reality we must come to terms with.
And are you saying gender is used as a yardstick to decide who gets what?
No. So I'm saying that those who decide who gets what are mainly men. Having established that, because we live in a deeply entrenched patriarchal society, we find ourselves in a situation where men will always advance their interests. It's the same thing that you'll find in any social setting, where different social groups will advance the interest of the settings or the people that they primarily represent. So when you look at the political system, and you can talk about that in terms of godfatherism, you know, where who decide who, and we've seen it, how people who want to advance to become, you know, hold certain positions will be told to, you know, step down or wait. So the first thing is the fact that we have a deeply entrenched political system that is dominated and, you know, kept by men. If you look at what Namibia is doing, Namibia is one of the countries that is doing well. And these are countries who moved from not having any female representation to now when they have, you know, adequate female representation. Namibia has a policy called the Zebra policy, or the SWAPO policy, which is the SWAPO party, which is the main political party, makes sure that women representation is a party, is a political party policy.
So there's a deliberateness to it.
Such that any political party, which is SWAPO in this regard, once they, whatever you see exemplified when they get into leadership position is a function of who they are at home. Who they are at home in terms of who they are in their political parties. That is one. The other thing I really want to talk about is the fact that whether we like it or not, the average woman considers politics as a dirty game. And don't blame women who think like that. And that is because if you just see the delegate system that Bukola talked about, you see how it is a dollarized delegate system. An average woman is not thinking like that. Is not thinking of the transactional nature of getting into leadership positions. A woman will be thinking of what capacity am I bringing to the table, what character am I bringing to the table. Not that I need to buy it, you know.
I mean, is this a general situation, or is this somewhat isolated incidents where you can pinpoint and say, okay, at this particular juncture, this was what actually happened, the monetization of the system? Because I reckon that it will also impugn on the character of the women who are currently in those positions, because they could easily say, well, we didn't have to pay money to actually get to where we got today.
See, I'm not saying that there are women who are not paying money. We've seen examples of maybe some women, but I'm saying that largely so. You hardly find women do the transactional delegating system of being, you know, appointed. It's so significantly widespread that we can't say it's an isolated situation. And that is one reality we really, you know, must come to terms with in terms of how our political party is run. Until we are able to deal with certain things at the political party system, we may not be able to see it in terms of the leadership representation. So for instance, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, when he was coming into power, one of the things he campaigned on, which we are tracking, was the fact that he's going to ensure 35% women representation. One of the 5 gender bills that was thrown out last year was a bill that sought to ensure that at least 35% of women are actually appointed. From what we have seen so far, just look at the principal officers at the Senate, at the House of Reps. The Senate, out of the 10 principal officers, none is a woman. At the House of Reps, out of the 10, we only have 1 woman. So what are we talking about?
Okay, you know, let's talk about, we know politics is a numbers game, even in governance to a certain extent, right? 3 senators out of 109 are women. I mean, as far as scaling is concerned, right? You look at the, you know, the distribution there in the House of Representatives. 1 managed to make it there, and it's not a particularly significant position, if we're going to be honest about it. How much of this is a factor of the politics involved, where it's a numbers game? There are more men than women, so a lot of people would think, listen, is the caucus? If the caucuses decide. You have women in the minority, for instance, like the House of Representative member representing the FCT, Senator Ireti, the one from Cross River State, and at some point they were talking about zoning some of these positions. So is it? I mean, how does the design in itself disadvantage women in this calculation? So
I will start with the last question you asked, that at what point do we begin to have this decline? Now, and I will say, now, Buki said something about 2007 and 2011. Now, when you look at those 2 years very well, now, the major thing is that was the point major political parties were feeding women. But what we have now, you have, if you go and look at the statistic of the women that contested in election, now you can hear about Binani, because she came from one of the leading majority political party.
political party.
Now, but you have greater percentage of the rest of the women.
These are some of the bills, by the way.
Yes,
you know,
contesting.
Bill on citizenship, indigenship,
yes.
that were scrapped.
So you have majority of the number of women contesting coming from the lesser party. So that alone has been a disadvantage. So when you go to 2007, you look at the Senate, you can actually say, oh, it's either they are from PDP or they are from ANPP or ACN then. And that is what you have. So now, what happened? For instance, this 2023 election, APC feeded one female governorship aspirant, and we had the name everywhere. The support was there. PDP did not feed any. So that is one of the things you have seen. But are you
saying these are conscious decisions, or is this just a factor of the ones that made themselves available, and it's about quality?
No, that was not. So because we started, for me now, we started tracking from the primaries. You also have more women coming out at the primaries. But transactional issues are there. Now, at times, the laws did not favor them. And that is why the conversation around legislation is key if you want to increase women political participation and representation or leadership. That conversation of legislation is key.
We're talking about affirmative action from the political participation point of view. But does that quota system take away from meritocracy, for instance, where you have to do the hard work instead of expecting it to be given to you on a platter?
Good question. See, meritocracy, in terms of do the hard work, whether we like it or not, women have been doing the hard work. This is 2023. We got into this democracy again in 1999. Between 1999, we've talked about the data and what the trend looks like. It's not been good. So that tells you that meritocracy or any other crazy that we can think of has not been yielding the results that we want. Every country, including Rwanda, that is on #1 on the Interparliamentarian Union ranking across the world, that has 63% of women representation, followed by Cuba. Every of those countries have one form of quota system or the other. Let me quickly say something on that. A quota system is one of the reserve seat bill, is one of the 5 gender bills that was thrown out. It's a temporary special measure. In international law, we say it's a temporary special measure. What people think about the temporary special measures, such as the reserve seat bill or what you call the quota system, they think it is permanent. No, it's temporary. And what it does is that you look at structurally disadvantaged or historically marginalized group of people, and then you put a temporary special measure in place to correct the history of disproportionate representation. And once that is corrected, you then remove that measure. What was proposed by Honorable Njideka in Kiruka or something, who post that reserve seat bill, was that let's give ourselves 16 years, adopt this quota system, let's spread it over for like 111 seats across board, and such that when we correct this historical disproportionate representation of women, then we can remove that measure. If not, men then become discriminated against. So every country that we have seen that we can point to say that they are doing well, they have one quota system or the other. Does it mean that the women don't merit it, or the women are not qualified enough and we are just doing this quota system to say let's just put them there? No, the women are qualified enough, just that we have structural systems that impede women's representation, and until we have such kind of measures, we will not be able to see proportionate representation.
Incidentally, in the United States, the Supreme Court just recently, overturned that affirmative action, because they say you can't keep it on forever, even though it is
not on political leadership, it's on the school system.
Yeah, and employment opportunities and things like that. But as far as the quota system is concerned, a lot of people would counter that argument by saying, listen, women are already, as far as equity is concerned, within the political system in the country, right? They get 50% off as far as buying forms are concerned, right? In some political parties, they will say they even give them free forms. Why is that not enough, in your view, to level the playing field?
Well, I think that is a bit of tokenism, and I don't think...
Isn't quota system also tokenism?
No. That is not it. That is not it. You see, when it comes to political party support for female candidates, it goes beyond the form. It goes beyond the nomination form. It's about Okay, so I give you an example. What is the whole essence of giving the women free form, yet the quota system? The quota system, I mean, not the quota system, the zoning system did not favor that woman. So, of course, she has the free form in her hand, but you are also saying that position she's contesting for is not for her, has been zoned to another place. That is number one. Number two, now you find a system where even from the party executive, most of the delegates are camped somewhere. In terms of the practice, we all know most of these practices because it goes beyond the form. Now, but for me, I think the first thing we need to first of all look at now is how do we open up the space? Now, the quota system you are talking about is one of the viable positions, because if you say we are practicing democracy, democracy is about representation. It is not for a certain set of people. So when you say, let's use the common definition of democracy. Democracy is the government of the people, by the people. People include both gender. And that is what it is. It's about representation.
But those positions are limited, right?
No, they are not.
Sometimes you could have a woman representing everybody in the society. Sometimes you could have a man represent everybody else in the society.
So I give you an example.
Old.
No. I give you an example. So what I am trying to say is this. When you say, look, this is representation. Now, okay, you want to have your minister, for instance, and then you are going to have 72 ministers. 35% is saying what number belongs to the women. Just give them. And what it means is that just select the best. It doesn't cost you anything, but just give us women. Nobody is talking about don't bring just bring anybody. Right. But that is representation, just equity that you just mentioned. And that is what we are talking. That is what is all about, representation. Right. Everybody must be represented. Now, don't forget, when the young people were having this same feelings too, agitation, then you have what you call the Not Too Young to Run bill. The Not Too Young to Run bill was just to open the space up through legislation.
You're not suggesting that it has worked, are you?
Because it has worked.
A lot of people are saying it hasn't worked.
No.
And I think the data also supports that.
What the data was saying before the space were opened up. Yes, before the space were opened up, now you have less than 10%. Young people coming in. Then in the night assembly, in the 2019, you have like about 34%. Of course, it has dipped. I mean, we have a dip now, which is like about 23 or 24%. But look at where we are coming from 10%.
Okay. In a moment's time, we get to talk about the consequences of this situation and how much it is actually costing us as a nation or as a continent, and what this representation could actually do to add value to the governance process itself. But we'll take a quick break. Daily Politics returns in just a moment as we double down on this conversation. Join us again. Welcome back to the program. Thank you very much for staying with us. Here's a quick reminder. You can follow the conversation across our social media platforms so you can keep up to date with all the conversations we're having across all those platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube Live, and of course our Threads account, which is active and live. Back in the studio, I have Buki and Aido, and they're doing justice to the conversation around representation, women representation, in politics, in governance, and how that is apparently costing Nigeria a lot, socially, politically, and economically, and all the other dimensions you can add to the conversation. So, Buki, just before the break, I said we're going to talk about consequences, or at least the cost of what is happening right now. You might see it as an anomaly, so to say, because Nigeria is not doing well as far as the ranking is concerned. You look at a country like Rwanda or Namibia, which you said are doing well in that particular area. It allows for a perfect representation of society itself, where the voices are heard, and you know, we talk about democracy being about the will of the people, and to a certain extent Nigerians are not represented in that area because a lot of women are not heard, and those voices really need to be amplified. What is the cost of this anomaly, so to say?
Good question. I had an interesting conversation with a sitting governor, and he said something, and I was saying that, oh, sir, women in your state, you just became a governor, make sure that there is, and he said to me, Buki, there is a problem with being able to advance women and that I will tie that to this question that you have asked in terms of what's the effect. He said there's 3 stages of power. You know, power politically, power acquisition, power consolidation, and then power utilization. Acquisition is where, you know, you're trying to acquire the power, you're campaigning and all of that. And he said what you see at the point of utilizing power, which is the third tranche of this spectrum that I just talked about, is that whatever you see at utilization starts from acquisition. And so when you don't have enough women from the acquisition state, by the time you are consolidating power, which is what President Tinubu is doing and other state governors, is where, okay, who takes what? Where you are consolidating power. Once women don't enter from acquisition, then consolidation, they fall off. And then for utilization of power, they fall off. Now, why am I saying that? What that shows is that there are political implications of we having underrepresentation of women, and we've talked about it a lot here in terms of just the numerical representation of women in politics. What that does is that once women don't feel encouraged enough to enter politics by the representation of other women, then they themselves just sit back and we keep having this trend. Economically, we've seen the World Bank, for instance, calculate exactly how much it costs Nigeria when women are not well represented. I don't have the figure, but there is also economic consideration. And one last consideration.
We do have some of the data there, and it's quite staggering, actually.
Yes, it is. So good. So this is, for instance, at the Senate, the difference from 1999 till now, how women have been represented. But one last one that I really want to touch on before I pass it on to my colleague also is the fact that in terms of the richness of the laws and policies that we make, when we don't have adequate women representation, then we don't have the peculiar and intersecting realities of women being represented. Now, note this, that we have more women in the legislative arm, for instance, does not necessarily translate to more women-related bills, because women themselves have their own intrinsic biases. So, for instance, when we're pushing for the domestication of CEDAW, that's the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination, of all forms of discrimination against women, there are some women we spoke with who said their religion is against, for instance, abortion, or their religion is against equal representation. We had the same problem where, since we've been pushing for the equal opportunities bill, you know, the GEO bill, you know, where there are women who say in their religion, you know, it means in their culture. So don't think that we have more women means that, because women themselves also have their own intrinsic biases. So, but what that does is that whether it is directly related bills that impact on women, children, persons with disability, and those historically marginalized groups, or even normal bills or normal laws, for instance, you will have less voice of women contributing to that, because we need to bring in perspective of women. Let me give you an example. Education-related laws, for instance. We need to bring in the reality of young girls, for instance, in the Northeast, who cannot go to school because of the insurgency. How are we considering all of that realities for them in the laws and the bills that we're making? So some really is to say that the economic, social, political, and just generally, even the intersection of socio-economic, socio-political implication of we having underrepresentation of women.
And you know, if we look at the situation right now, right? I mean, there are so many, you know, different polarizing views about this conversation, but one thing we can agree on is that, you know, the contribution of women politically, socially, economically in this country cannot be overemphasized, right? What are your thoughts about what is being done right now, whether it's the gender policy, because we do have some legislation that allows for that. Even the affirmative action, for instance. I mean, last year, a federal high court pretty much gave an order compelling the government to do the needful as far as appointment of women in government is concerned. If you flip the conversation and you look at the political terrain, where it's perhaps guarantees an easy access for women to get into positions of power. You talk about electability, for instance, right? You have a lot of women with PVCs. And we talk about voter turnout on election day. And women have this almost perfect record as far as coming out on election day to vote. Whether it's, you know, we're talking about older women or not, it's a different conversation, but women do come out. They're the ones who are under the scorching sun. They can wait out for 5 hours until the election officials come because they're that committed, right? And we've seen some of them on election day recently turn down the inducements and say, listen, we're going to vote for whoever we want to vote. Why doesn't that translate for more support for women as far as electability is concerned on election day? Because we did have women on election day on various political parties, but they didn't have a particularly good showing.
Okay, so and I think the first thing I already mentioned that, and I think this stronger political party should start from there. Let's have like a gender responsive policy around their constitution, you know, that encourages women, and I think that is a good place to start. I already said in 2007, in 2011, you find most of these leading political party feeding more women. And for instance, now everybody was hearing about Binani contesting, but do you even know that there was another woman that contest in some other states? So we didn't even hear whether they win or not, but we didn't even hear that. So, but I think the good place to start is that we look at that political party, and at the same time we also need a situation where we open the space of through legislation. So we need to start that, we need to revisit that issue of temporary measure again, and that alone. So what you are just saying is that this constituency allow women to contest for that. So what it means is that the best of the women will contest from that particular constituency. So, and one of the things that
and you don't think that is undemocratic, because you could also constitutionally be violating the rights,
the principle of discrimination.
No, that is not. Because for instance,
you would be, if you say this is exclusively for women, what you're also saying is no man can contest this position.
So why are we now? Why are we going to
unconstitutional?
Yes. Why are we going to say that is unconstitutional when you say, look, position of the president in our party is exclusively for the South and not the Northern people and not the Eastern people? Is that democratic enough? So why not throw it open and say everybody? Why do you zone it? So this is another aspect of zoning.
I don't also think that zoning is particularly a very good democratic tenet. I mean, it might speak to justice and fairness.
Yeah, but it speaks to what? Justice and fairness. So what we are also saying is that this also speaks to justice, fairness, and equity. Because by the time you say, and like Bukola said, it's a temporary measure. One of the advantages is that now, number one, women will have been there who will have built capacity, who by the time you remove the measure, they can stand on their own, because they will have gathered experience. It also encourage them to, it also help them to be able to mentor other women. Now, it's also opening the space up for more women to come. Now, they can actually say, hey, like she said something about the cycle of the people. Some people feel politics has been a dirty game. No, but by the time you are there, you can call other women and say, hey, this is not as dirty as you think. Come in. I am here. It's safe. So you encourage, opening the space up has a whole lot to do. And then lastly, in terms of the advantage, do you know there was a report that said Nigeria, I mean, that said, look, when you have achieved and I'm quoting UN statistics now, that when you achieve gender equality, then you are likely going to save 6.8% of your defense spending. Now,
so that's the benefit.
That is one of the benefits. And do you know in the US there is a bill in the US that is called WPSI. WPS, that is Women, Peace and Security. bill, and that talks about even among there is supposed to be a quota of women among the foreign diplomats, and that is and you keep asking yourself, why do we even have most of these foreign diplomats? Some of them are women, and they confer, and because you see, we have a lot of benefits. If you want, I just mentioned one now, and we can go into, in fact, there is one UNDP research that talks about the sub-Saharan African is losing $75 billion. That's a lot, because we are not achieving gender parity. Okay. So, and that is what we need to begin to look at.
Now Buki, in talking about what we're missing out, clearly that's one way to look at it, right? But what are other countries enjoying from their own relatively fair, balanced governance system that allows for men and women to coexist on the decision table to come up with policies and programs of government? What are we missing out on? What are some of these countries that have a much better rating? What are they benefiting from that type of representation?
So, so first, let me quickly say that, so the point you made about, the possible constitutional discrimination if we have such kind of measure, just to say that at the international law level, the Human Rights Committee, in deciding on international equality law, have been able to establish that temporary special measure is not discriminatory, whether it is constitutionalized or not. So
I bet if I go to the Nigerian courts, they would definitely say something else.
Funny enough, I was just studying on that just yesterday. But just to quickly say that, so when countries that have had good representation, that have proportionate representation of women, enjoy all of the benefit or the converse of the things that we have been talking about. One of the data that we are currently collecting at Invictus Africa is to collect the data on the number of girls that are represented as prefects in schools, just as a bottom-up approach, because a lot of times we focus on the Senate, House of Reps, but when you go to the typical secondary school and look at election of prefects, how many girls are represented there? Why do we want to look at that? We want to look at sort of like a bottom-up approach, from that place. And why are we looking at that? Women have unique, innate, God-given talent that they bring to leadership, whether we like it or not.
You're about to start a gender war. You're about to start a gender war. I was on your side all along, but go ahead.
This is not to say that men are not uniquely designed in their own and they bring it to the table. I've balanced that, so no one. But women, just like men, have unique identities. And I must really put in here, when we talk about equal representation and we're talking about women, we're also talking about persons with disabilities. We're also talking about young people as well. These are historically marginalized groups. And so when we have more women represented, countries like Rwanda and all of these countries that we've been mentioning, I'm not saying that Rwanda is the way Rwanda is because women are represented. But just go to the country and just see how the country is thriving. It tells you that women bring special, ideas, special thoughts. But most importantly, it helps us feed into the principle of not leaving anyone behind. Not leaving people behind is not just about the numerical representation. It means that your own realities as an individual, your intersectional realities, because not just women, imagine a woman that is poor and that is disabled. That's intersectional discrimination going on there. How do you bring in those? Who is best to bring in those perspectives? Those women. Those people who are historically marginalized. There is no way that a man who does not sit in my who does not wear my shoes will be able to understand my realities and bring in my realities into lawmaking, for instance, into policy formulation, into policy reviews. So countries who have been able to do that are enjoying an equal society. But beyond that, we know we women are efficient, we manage money better. Give us 30,000 to go to the market, no gender war. We will make sure that, just put a woman as a minister for finance, for instance, and see how we are going to manage the budget.
A lot of people will say we had that just 4 years ago. It didn't particularly turn out well. 8 years ago, we had that. But then again...
but let me close my thought by saying that having more women means that perspectives of women and the realities of women are brought into governance.
Okay. Let's talk about what is happening right now. Away from the National Assembly, the president recently got the all clear to appoint 20 special advisors. He has utilized 12 as at the last count, I think. So far, we've had 4 women. What do you make of the body language of the Tinubu administration? We're yet to see the ministerial list, which is, I suppose, the big list that everybody is waiting for. What are your thoughts about how well he has done so far, whether or not he has indicated a willingness to abide by the affirmative action that we've been talking about?
I think he has started on a very good foot. But I would like to see more being done in terms of this, because for me, these are just the low-hanging fruit that he can control, because it is at his discretion, within his power, to choose this set of people, and because these are the people that will work with him. I want to believe, looking at the antecedent of the President Bola Ahmed Tinubu. Don't forget, he was the governor in 1999, and they were the one that started this. Oh, you picked your deputy to be female. You remember, and then that tradition continues on until just recently, because I think that was when he chose Bokno Akerele to be his deputy. So, and I think he's going to do. For me, I want to see that. I want to believe that he's going to do better in that regard. In fact, if you have 4 already now, and that is a good start for me. But what we are just saying is that we just need to. I mean, he need to make sure that this is being done.
And we'll just look at some of the newly announced names. Adiza Bala, for instance, her track record in the Post Authority speaks volume. Her no-nonsense approach and, due diligence sort of character. For him to consider her as, special advisor on policy coordination, what does that tell you? I mean, because policy coordination does sound like a very serious job.
Okay. So that is, and that is what we are talking about. Now, recognizing the capacity of the women is key. And now it's about the credibility, it's about the competence, it's about the character. Now, and whether you like it or not, let's even go back to statistics and look at when our economy was a bit better than what we have today. Who was when that terminology was carved out, coordinating minister of the economy? That was when you have Okonjo-Iweala then, you remember. So what I'm trying to say, when you look at this, it also shows that President Tinubu believes in the capacity of the women and also believe in that aspect, which he talked about in terms of the 35% of women. But we want to see him, implementing that to the fullest. And that would have been the best.
Buki, your analysis has been very critical. Have you seen any reason to be positively, I mean, you can't be positively optimistic, you can't be optimistic. Have you seen anything that makes you feel optimistic about the chances of women as far as political appointments and representation in this administration? Have you seen anything that would give you a sense of hope in the next few years?
Both two sides, cautiously optimistic. I have
cautiously optimistic.
Yeah. Cautiously optimistic, because you talked about body language now. Yes, 4 out of 12, until we see the full picture, we may not be able to have...
it sounds like he's covered, right?
Yeah, it sounds like, no, but really, seriously, it sounds like it is covered. And that is also looking at a president who, in his campaign promise, that is in his Renewed Hope manifesto, he pitched his campaign relating to women and girls on 5 key pillars, one of which, includes social inclusion and political representation of women. Now, why I said I'm cautiously optimistic is because on the one hand, you look at his promise regarding the fact that he's going to work with the National Assembly to pass legislation to promote female employment in government offices, ministries, and agencies. However, when this zoning happened, and then principal of or key officials of the Senate and the House of Reps, we did not see any woman. That body language did not go down well, with gender activists like me who want to see more women representation. However, when we look at the flip side and relate that to his second promise regarding the fact that he's going to ensure women's participation at least 35%. If we look at the appointment that he has made so far, 4 out of 12 is good representation, which is why we are currently with we've done the calculation for him actually
Right.
to say if you are going to have 40 ministers, for instance, we expect 35%
You're not
of 40.
encouraging him to have 40 ministers, are you?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not encouraging. I'm
Okay.
talking hypothetically. So let me say 20, or let me say. So if you're going to have 20 ministers, for instance, 35% of that means that we're expecting, nothing less than at least more than 20 or more than 15, so to speak. But basically, just to say that I'm honestly optimistic. I'm also optimistic because of his track record in terms of being able to identify talent, such as Hadiza Bala Usman, who I've known and who I've also worked with and who I know our capacity. But please, yes, the president has that responsibility. He can only go as far. We also have data on women representation in the cabinet. But we must also not forget the states, because the states will also appoint their commissioners. Well, let's also look at what we expect to see in terms of the number of states, and in terms of the number of women in state cabinet.
Right. As someone from Adamawa State, I have to say that the 2023 general election has been good for a lot of reasons. First, you had a candidate that got the attention of the world, Senator Binani, but also her emergence as candidate of the APC made the PDP rethink its own particular team. So now we have the first female deputy governor of Adamawa State, who also is, a professor, a professor and someone who has a proven track record. So, is it fair to say, yes or no, that there could be low-hanging fruits in that direction, where now the powers that be are actually noticing how some of these trends could actually inspire the electorate to actually consider some of these dynamics going into. So
I think those are the gains. Those are the gains, and like I said, if you don't look at the analysis you just given, you link it back to the political parties. APC did this, so PDP. I think we have to reconstitute, and that is the power of those leading political parties.
All right. Unfortunately, that's the much time we have for this particular conversation. I know somewhere in the near future we'll definitely circle back to this one, especially as more appointments and nominations come about. Thank you both for the wonderful conversation and for your insight on this conversation. Really appreciate you very much for stopping by.
Thank you so much.
Right. And of course, this is where we draw the curtains on today's edition of the program. Thank you most kindly for joining us. That's it for Daily Politics on Trust TV. Do well to follow us across all our social media platforms for more content. My name is Abdullahi Ahmed. Thank you for your time. We'll see you next time.